whole concept of a turnpike was brought up in a University of Colorado civil engineering class back in the 1920s. And then the idea just lay dormant for a couple decades, and finally somebody brought it up again and initiated the idea of a toll road. It was a real success, and at even 25 or 35 cents, it was paid off in 1967.
Broomfield's been here a really long time, but it didn't really change dramatically as far as its character until post-war when they built the turnpike. You used to have to kind of go a roundabout way up through Lafayette and cross on Arapahoe Road to get to Boulder. And so they decided to build a turnpike that would go straight from Denver straight to Boulder. The only way that he could get it passed was to have it be a toll road. There was only one place to get off of the turnpike between Denver and Boulder, and that was at Wadsworth.
A lot of the old farmer families and communities, I'm not so sure they were that excited about the new development. Everything was changing.
I can remember him saying, the turnpike, that ain't nothing but a waste of money. It's just a place for the people who own them hot rods in Boulder to race all the way to Denver. And they're gonna be all those viaducts just a place to breed crime. You know, people aren't happy with change.
The turnpike opened in 1952, and under Wadsworth were the toll booths. And the workmen one day were throwing out their sandwich scraps or something, and along came this stray dog, and he was a mongrel, but he was part shepherd. They just kept him, and people would come along, and when they would pay their toll, they would give a little extra money for dog food or drop off a dog toy or something like that and take care of Shep.
I mean, everybody loved that dog. Everybody would look forward to seeing that dog. And Shep was there every time you went.
And he just lived there, and the toll booth men expected him to live there, and they took care of him, and he lived there 14 years.
The desire that comes out of the war for a calmer, more bearable way of life, that's very strong. The economic situation and the federal programs to support home ownership and to build roads that would make suburbs accessible, that is what makes it possible to say, well, I don't need to be that close to work anymore.
It started with the Cherokee Trail, later called the Overland Trail, and the gold prospectors coming through here in the Colorado Gold Rush in 1859, and early homesteaders following a few years later. It was always a transportation corridor, first by the gold seekers and the Indians and the stagecoaches and the railroads and, of course, the turnpike. There's always been people passing through.
My great-grandparents opened up Church's Crossing stage stop, and that was on the Overland stage route, and that was midway between Denver and Boulder. It was a one-day stage ride from Denver to get to Church's Crossing and another day to get to Boulder. They were farmers and ranchers, and they raised their own food. My great-grandfather was very instrumental in bringing water down from the Continental Divide through Church Ditch and Upper Church Lake and Lower Church Lake. And then they learned that much the same way development follows transportation corridors, it also follows and has to have water, especially in Colorado.
The Zhang family owned a lot of the property, I think about 5 square miles of property here for their ranching, and they had a whole spur on the railroad. They called it Zhang Spur. And so in the very early days, Broomfield and Zhang Spur were kind of synonymous. This was Adolph Zhang, the son of the brewer Philip Zhang. The name Broomfield was first proposed by the U.S. Post Office when the post office was formed in 1884. The farmers in the Broomfield area were growing broom corn, and they used it for making brooms. It's a very fibrous plant, and it was resistant to grasshoppers, and that was a real problem with some of the early crops, is the grasshoppers would just wipe them out. They were very stiff fibers and usually wrapped with some kind of rope or braid or something to hold it together.
They had a little downtown there that was very vibrant. A number of the historical buildings were either demolished or torn down. They used to have the train depot, the post office, the grain elevators, the Grange Hall, which is there today, the old Broomfield garage. They had all these things in this one little one-block stretch. Big parties they had in the summertime at the Grange Hall. People came from miles around, made a whole day of it. They had live music with fiddlers and other musicians. And the old people, the young adults, the kids all danced and partied in there, and it was known as one of the best places to go to dances all around.
They just lived off the fat of the land. That's the way it was. It was all farm community here. Very little was bought. You did it yourself. You farmed it yourself. You made your own butter. You had your chickens. You had your cows, horses, pigs. You had your sheep.
My grandmother and grandfather, came from Kansas to Broomfield in 1915. They continued to purchase land to where we ended up with about 180 acres down by where the city-county offices are, and also 10th and Main. We had a barn where the Bruner house is now located, and I think every kid needs a barn. That's where you dream of big things to come. I had my 13th birthday party there in the barn, and actually I got a little record player that year, and I got 2 records. One of them was Let Me Be Your Teddy Bear by Elvis Presley, and the other one was You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog.
For the 1950s, the scale of home ownership is dramatically different from anything that came before it. Returning World War II veterans, the GI Bill, the economic boom, a prosperous period, and the veterans really wanting to have the reward for their service. Really, the federal programs to support home ownership and to build roads that would make suburbs accessible. It's such a distant location from other areas. It's almost like a laboratory. We can control all the variables here. The press was calling it a dream city. This is the society moving into a new era of prosperity and democratic economic opportunity, and the idea that a good life could be available to so many regular folks.
They called it Broomfield Heights originally. That and the turnpike grew together. I mean, it was called the city by the turnpike. So it was this new concept, this new highway, the new city, these post-World War II small brick homes, and they were just touted as being, state of the art. Everybody had a garbage disposal. Everybody had all of the latest appliances, and, buy our home and life will be wonderful.
When I was a kid, these new houses started being built, and my sister and I and the farm neighbor kids, we would play in those holes, and there was construction work, and there was all this excitement. We just could hardly wait for those houses to get finished.
When Broomfield actually started, it was considered to be a planned community, one of the first in the United States. Curvilinear streets, neighborhood parks.
When Broomfield Heights started out, it wasn't actually a city. It wasn't incorporated, so they depended on the county for their services.
We tried every way in the world to impress on Boulder that they needed to build a high school and expand it in Broomfield because it was inevitable that we were going to grow. It fell on deaf ears. We were just kind of a distant cousin, an orphan out here. More cattle and horses than people.
So you had a cluster of homes out there, sort of on the prairie, and they had to sort of come up with ways to serve the needs of their kids and their families and their community. You had this character develop in Broomfield that we're going to have to take care of ourselves because nobody's going to do it for us.
There's no government, so we passed the hat. And I can remember many Saturdays walking up and down streets asking for contributions to pay for our police department. I was the justice of the peace, and we held court at my home every Tuesday and Thursday nights from 7 to 9.
They didn't have any schools at first, so they started what they called their cottage schools. They held classes in the houses.
The first cottage school was over on First Avenue, and they had elementary classes for the children. It was a house with normal-sized rooms for a family, so they didn't have a lot of children in a classroom.
And then Emerald School was built, Cole School was built, Birch, and of course then the high school.
We had a very small shopping center, bought our groceries in the basement of Empire Savings. That was Val Swan's company, and Val Swan is the one that had the vision to build Broomfield. Had a very prominent investor, Dwight Eisenhower, who was a personal friend of Val's. Mamie Dowd had given her a collection of books to start our library. And to have President Eisenhower and his wife come to the dedication of our library was really a coup.
My Aunt Jessie knew everybody. She was a telephone operator down there on 120th and Lowell Boulevard. On the party lines, if you didn't know where someone was, you could just pick up the phone and my Aunt Jessie would know exactly where they were. So when we had all the kids coming in across the street in these nice houses, you know, I lived in an old farmhouse, and gosh, everybody had low ceilings, and it was just a totally different lifestyle. But they'd invite me over for a Sunday, and it would be playing a game or having fun. But when I invited them over, it was for branding, dehorning, and vaccination. Needless to say, some of the kids didn't want to come back. My grandmother, she probably had a little insight more than we did. You know, we were a little bit upset she decided to sell the water rights on our property. And I think she saw the future. So my father on horseback, on our old horse Star, brought the cattle down and right into the driveway, right into a sale truck. And that really was the last roundup. It was the end of an era.
Broomfield incorporated as a city in 1961. It was only like 3 years after Broomfield incorporated, they did a master plan. In 1968, when I came out, Broomfield had pretty much 2 residential subdivisions. Filing number 1 was south of Midway. Filing number 2 is north of Midway. The city had about 6,500 residents. The area of Broomfield was about 1.5 square miles. Small community, very attractive, very pleasant.
The people that bought the houses had to have jobs. And one of our major employers, as you came into the 50s and the 60s, was Rocky Flats, and the production of the triggers for nuclear weapons. This is the height of the Cold War at the time, but the jobs at the Flats were well paid. In the late 60s, an incident happened that touched off a whole series of annexation wars. Before 1970, Broomfield was located in one county, Boulder County. We were on the very corner of Boulder County. So 120th was the southern boundary, and Sheridan then was the eastern boundary of Boulder County. Well, in 1969, Western Electric announced the construction of a large plant over on 120th and Huron, which was to be located at the new interchange on I-25. The interstates were just being built in the 60s. That was sort of a new area for development north of Denver. Western Electric was to be a huge employer. They would have jobs for the community, bring in tax base. So you had these communities of the north that were very small, North Glen, Westminster, Arvada, Broomfield. And as a result of these annexation wars in 1970, Westminster annexed to the north. They not only got the Western Electric site, but they also cut off Arvada and annexed over to Stanley Lake. And so Arvada could not go to the north, and Westminster sort of locked up that whole area for their future development. As a result of all this annexation activity, Broomfield needed to look out for their interests. So in a defensive posture, we began to annex to the east. That took us into Adams County. At the same time, we annexed a few of the old farm families that we had relationships with south of 120th. After these series of annexation wars, we were suddenly in 3 counties.
And a lot of the areas that Broomfield annexed, actually the farmers and the original owners said, well, you know, I don't want to farm anymore. Maybe it's time to annex my land into the city, and some held out longer, but I think they all knew that development and growth was headed this way.
Annexation is important to a property owner because if you plan to sell your property or develop your property, you really can't do it unless you have a water supply and a sanitary sewer system. You really have to annex to a city because the cities are the ones that have the water and sewer systems. Things were pretty quiet annexation-wise on through the 70s. Attention was focused on putting in water and sewer lines, building out these developments.
But in the early years, the challenges were really to make sure we, as each development grew, that we were able to get a neighborhood park and playground within walking distance of every youngster in the community. And because of the requirements put on the developers to assist in that role, it was a nice partnership, and we were able to achieve our master plan goals in doing that.
In the early 80s, we made one key annexation, and that was property along the turnpike in what today is Interlochen. Well, in the middle 80s then, the cities looked at expanding their boundaries, and once again, they had eyes on the same properties. This touched off the annexation wars with Louisville, Lafayette, Westminster, North Glen, Thornton. So in 1988, we were right in the middle of this annexation battle that would set the future tax base for years to come and set the financial future of the city. Westminster wanted to cut off Broomfield to 144th and annex all the way over to Boulder County line. Broomfield wanted to go north of 144th, up to the Weld County line at 168th. We wanted to go over to I-25. Thanks to the work of some of city staff members and elected officials, we annexed property 160th and Huron and cut off Westminster's growth up along I-25. It certainly was a big chess game, and it certainly put us in conflict with Westminster in particular.
Broomfield, as a result of a lot of these annexations, was in 4 different counties: Adams, Boulder, Jefferson, and Weld. The community went through a citizens' vision process, and one of the recommendations of the citizens was that Broomfield consider becoming a combined city and county.
So here we are in 96. Citizens say, go create a city and county. Okay, well, that hasn't been done since Denver did it like 100 years ago. So procedurally, you had to change the constitution of the state.
We decided to go through the state legislature. It was placed on the ballot. There was a citizens group that worked very hard statewide to explain why Broomfield wanted to become a city and a county. So then it was on the statewide ballot and was approved. And so then the question becomes, now what do you do? And we thought about, well, is there some way to streamline all of this? The police chief serves as sheriff. We don't need 2 positions. But we combined the Health and Human Services Department. Finance director then assumed all of the duties and functions of the county treasurer. After we combined city and county government, that has saved Broomfield taxpayers over $60 million in property tax revenues.
Back in the 80s, certainly in the 90s, as we grew explosively, we had lots of new residents, but we had no tax base.
Broomfield had one of the lowest sales tax revenues per capita of any city in the metropolitan area. So we focused on first-class business park with corporations for the property tax base to help the residential part of the community, and then to plan ahead for retail development, a regional mall.
Prior to the Flatirons Crossing Mall coming to town, the challenge was to do more with less, and our citizens supported us, getting the Bay Outdoor Aquatic Park and the senior center and upgrading our recreation center. And then as we grew, and of course as the Flatirons Crossing Mall came in, then the revenues picked up and we were able to expand on that.
We're finally able to build the new soccer fields, build the new baseball fields, build the new rec center, build the library.
Broomfield sales tax revenues per capita now are like 3rd highest in the metropolitan area, right behind Denver and Boulder. When you have a parks and open space system that adds a feeling of openness to the community, for some reason that helps reduce the crime rate. But if you take a look at the major types of crimes per 1,000 population of all of the cities in the Denver metropolitan area, Broomfield is either the lowest or next to the lowest in major crimes per 1,000. Streamlining government can be done. It's not easy. It takes a careful financial planning. The Broomfield local government and the citizens do work together. We do have a unique approach to governing. We take our citizens seriously, and I think that aspect creates the spirit of the community, the Broomfield way. Considering the relatively short period of time that Broomfield has been a city, the growth has been remarkable. You go from a population of 6,500 to approaching a population of 60,000. That's quite a bit of growth. But I think fortunately, from Broomfield's standpoint, it was well managed. We had the master plan. City council was very committed to the comprehensive plan and the growth policies and the open space goals and the idea of an interconnected park system, and all these things came to play.
I think it came to our roots as the old planned community out in the middle of nowhere. People had to work together, rely on each other to get these things done. They want to be part of something special. And so we have this sort of tight-knit sense of community and sense of accessibility and responsiveness to citizens that goes back to when we were a little tiny community in the middle of nowhere.
I think there's a core belief that we're still a small town. People call Broomfield hometown USA. I think it is. We're still small at heart.
I see kids at Broomfield Days that I saw come there when they were small, and they're coming there now with their little ones, and that's a very special feeling. Well, George DeCero, our city manager for 42 years, really had a lot of vision about Broomfield and where it should go, and developed a master plan early on. And that included quality of life issues like parks and open space, schools. We have a neighborhood park within walking distance of every youngster in town.
I think Broomfield has been very fortunate with the quality of the mayors we've had and the city council members. They've just done an outstanding job providing policy leadership and caring for the community. Every mayor I've worked with and council members that I've worked with all share that. They really care about Broomfield and they give it their all. And I think it shows.
We have always had responsible government. We have never had a budget problem. We live within our means.
I'd like to see jobs stay here so that you can have a balance of jobs and families, and you shop closer to home and you make sure that your shopkeeper is doing well, he and his family.
My hope for the future of Broomfield is that people will continue to be involved in the community, in its planning, and its hope for the future, and keep the traditions that we've established alive, because I think they have lent themselves so much to the spirit and the heart and soul of Broomfield.
Shep's been very important to many, many people here in Broomfield. So, 7 years ago, there's going to be this new road, and Shep could be in jeopardy. The city maintenance men moved him up there, along with the fence, along with his stones. The school children now come for the tours. He's right there. They see Shep.
That corner where the two silos are is just the way I always remember it. I can remember my dad standing out in front of that train station of just a little wood building, and it's nice that they picked it up and moved it and saved it, and that's great, and that's still here. Some of the water storage facilities are still there, and the old ditches, all the things that a lot of people drive by and don't pay attention to.
Lakeview was established, the first borough was in about 1889, and those were the early, truly the pioneers of Broomfield that were buried there. Then it really started growing up in weeds. That was just an eyesore. So the city took it over as a park.
Nostalgia for the 19th century pioneer West has been very powerful because of all the heroism, all the achievement. And maybe the people look back nostalgically at the great pioneers of the 20th century. They pitched in and they made homes. Then they created schools and they made themselves into a community and into neighbors. I actually think that's probably pretty likely that by 2040, 2050, there'll be a movement of great nostalgia for the pioneers of 1950s Broomfield.